Before we begin, a question. What if I told you that the hatred between Iran and America didn't start in 1979? That the embassy siege, the chance of death to America, the decades of sanctions and proxy wars, none of it came from nowhere? What if I told you the real story begins more than 100 years ago, with a single contract signed in a palace in Tehran, involving a British oil baron, a desperate king, and one of the most audacious acts of theft in the history of the modern world? This is not the story you were taught in school. This is the story of how one ancient civilization came to see the most powerful nation on earth as its oldest enemy, and why. To fully understand it, you have to go back to the very beginning. To understand Iran today, you first have to understand what Iran was. For thousands of years, the land known as Persia was not some backwater nation waiting to be discovered by the West. It was the center of the world. Cyrus the Great built the first human rights charter. Persian poetry shaped the literary tradition of 3 continents. The Persian Empire stretched from Egypt to India. This was a civilization that had been sophisticated, educated, and proud long before London or Washington, D.C. had even been founded. By 1900, that empire had contracted. The Qajar dynasty sat on the peacock throne in Tehran, weak and cash-strapped, ruling a nation that outside powers were already circling like wolves around a wounded lion. From the north, Russia. From the south and west, Britain. And then, in 1901, a British businessman named William Knox Darcy walked into the Persian court with a briefcase full of promises and an offer the cash-desperate Shah simply could not refuse. Darcy paid roughly £40,000, equivalent to a few $1 million today, for something extraordinary: a 60-year exclusive license to explore, extract, and export all the oil beneath Persian soil across a territory of 500,000 square miles. 60 years, 500,000 square miles, for £40,000. In 1908, they struck oil in the southwestern province of Kazakhstan, one of the richest petroleum deposits ever found on Earth. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company was born. By 1914, Winston Churchill converted the entire British Royal Navy from coal to oil. The fuel powering British dominance of the seas was Persian oil. And what did Persia receive? A royalty rate of 16%, when it was paid at all. British accountants were creative. They deducted expenses so generously that in many years, the Persian government received almost nothing. The wealth flowing out of Persian soil built refineries in Britain, fueled British warships, and filled British treasuries. The Persians who lived above those oil fields lived in poverty. This was not merely a bad business deal. In Iranian memory, it became the original wound. The moment the West looked at their land and saw not a people, not a civilization, not a sovereign nation, but a resource to be extracted. Meanwhile, something even more humiliating was happening. In 1907, Britain and Russia quietly signed the Anglo-Russian Convention. Without consulting a single Iranian official, they divided Persia into 3 zones: a Russian sphere of influence in the north, a British sphere in the south, and a thin buffer zone in the middle. Read that again. 2 foreign empires sat down together and divided a sovereign country between themselves, a country with a functioning government, an ancient culture, and 20 million people, as if drawing lines in sand. When the First World War arrived, both Russia and Britain occupied Persian territory for strategic reasons, despite Persia declaring neutrality. Russian and British troops marched through Persian cities. Foreign soldiers garrisoned Persian roads. Persian civilians starved as supply lines were disrupted and harvests were commandeered. Historians estimate that between 1917 and 1919, as many as 2 million Persians died from famine and disease caused directly by the wartime occupation of their own country. 2 million people, in a country that was not even part of the war. And when the war ended, Britain moved not to leave, but to tighten its grip. The Anglo-Persian Agreement of 1919 would have turned Persia into a virtual British protectorate, with British advisors controlling the military, treasury, and ministries. The Persian parliament refused to ratify it. The public outcry was enormous. But the insult had been delivered. The message had been received. For Iranians, the West did not arrive as a liberator, a partner, or an ally. It arrived as a landlord. Out of this chaos emerged a soldier named Reza Khan. In 1921, Reza Khan led a coup, seized power, and in 1925 crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, founder of a new dynasty, self-styled modernizer, and Iran's Iron Fist. He built roads, railways, universities, and a professional army. He was also ruthless, autocratic, and deeply suspicious of foreign interference. When World War II came, Britain and the Soviet Union needed Iran's oil and its railway to supply the Soviet front. Reza Shah, sympathetic to Germany and determined to resist foreign occupation a second time, was in their way. In August 1941, British and Soviet forces invaded Iran simultaneously, from north and south. Within weeks, Reza Shah was forced to abdicate. He was put on a ship and sent into exile. He died 3 years later in South Africa, a man without a country. His young, 21-year-old son Mohammad Reza was placed on the throne, a pliant, inexperienced king the British believed they could control. They were not wrong. Not yet. But something had been seeded in the Iranian public mind. 2 foreign invasions within living memory. An oil company that took their wealth. A king removed at foreign gunpoint. The pattern was undeniable. And then came the man who tried to change it. His name was Mohammad Mosaddegh, and in 1951 he became the most popular politician in Iranian history. Mosaddegh was old, emotional, and eccentric. He was famous for crying during speeches, for conducting meetings in his pajamas, for fainting dramatically at moments of high tension. But beneath the theatrics was a mind of extraordinary legal precision and a will of iron. His message was simple: Iranian oil belongs to Iranians. When Mosaddegh was elected prime minister in April 1951, he nationalized the Anglo-Russian oil company and expelled British technicians from the Abadan refinery, then the largest oil refinery in the world. The reaction in Tehran was euphoria. In London, it was fury. In Washington, it was alarm. Britain immediately imposed an economic blockade and lobbied the world to boycott Iranian oil. Mosaddegh took his case to the United Nations and the International Court of Justice and won. The court ruled it had no jurisdiction to override Iranian sovereignty. Here was a democratically elected leader, working through international legal channels, asserting his nation's right to its own natural resources. By any measure of post-war international norms, he was in the right. But he was threatening British profits. And increasingly, he was being labeled something dangerous, a potential communist. This is where America enters the story, and where it never truly leaves. The Eisenhower administration, newly in office in 1953, was deeply anxious about Soviet expansion. Iran sat along the Soviet border. Whether Mosaddegh himself was a communist is beside the point. American strategists feared what might fill the space if his government collapsed. Britain's MI6 had already been planning a coup. Now they brought the CIA to the table. The operation was called Operation Ajax by the Americans, Operation Boot by the British. Its architect on the American side was Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, who slipped into Tehran under a false identity and began the work of buying loyalty. CIA money flooded into Tehran's newspaper offices, religious establishments, and military barracks. Paid mobs took to the streets. Bribed journalists published stories portraying Mosaddegh as a communist stooge. Military officers were cultivated and flipped. On August 19, 1953, the coup was executed. Tanks rolled through Tehran. Mossadegh's house was surrounded. The old man was arrested in his pajamas. He was tried for treason against the Shah, a man he had served, convicted, sentenced to 3 years in prison, and then held under house arrest for the rest of his life. He died in 1967, never forgiven, never rehabilitated, never allowed to leave his estate. The Shah returned to power. The CIA's man was on the throne, and the Anglo-American Oil Consortium, now including American companies like Standard Oil, reclaimed control of Iranian petroleum. The United States government would not officially acknowledge its role in the 1953 coup until 2013. 60 years of denial. But Iranians knew. They had always known. And this, more than anything else, is the original sin in the American relationship with Iran. Not 1979, not the hostage crisis, not the sanctions. 1953. The day America looked at a functioning democracy and destroyed it because the man leading it dared to say, "This oil is ours." The Shah that returned to power in 1953 was hardened, paranoid, and acutely aware that his throne rested on foreign support rather than popular legitimacy. He built a secret police force called SAVAK, trained in part by the CIA and Israel's Mossad, that became one of the most feared intelligence agencies in the Middle East. Amnesty International estimated in the 1970s that Iran had more political prisoners per capita than any nation on earth. And through all of it, America said nothing. American presidents shook the Shah's hand and called him a great ally. American weapons flowed into Iran in enormous quantities. By 1977, Iran was the largest purchaser of American arms in the world. Nixon called the Shah the policeman of the Persian Gulf. The Iranian people watched their king spend oil money on lavish palaces and military hardware, while ordinary Iranians remained poor. They watched their political opposition imprisoned and tortured in American-designed facilities. And they understood the equation. America supported the Shah. America's support made the Shah possible. Therefore, America was responsible for everything the Shah did. This is not propaganda. This is how ordinary Iranians experienced their history. Every torture session in Evin prison, every arrested student, every exiled intellectual, all of it was seen through the lens of American complicity. Jimmy Carter visited Tehran in December 1977, barely a year before the revolution. He raised his glass at a state dinner and toasted the Shah, calling Iran an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world. 14 months later, the Shah fled the country, never to return. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 was not simply an Islamic revolution. It was a revolution of accumulated rage. It swept up leftists and liberals and nationalists and students alongside religious conservatives, united by a single shared enemy, the Shah. And behind the Shah, America. When Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile in Paris on February 1st, 1979, he landed at Mehrabad Airport to one of the largest crowds in human history. Some estimates say 5 million people lined the route into Tehran. This was not simply religious devotion. This was 3 generations of humiliation finally finding a voice. When the Shah, ill with cancer, was admitted to the United States in October 1979 for medical treatment, it was too much. To Iranians who remembered 1953, who knew the CIA had given the Shah his throne, the image of America sheltering him felt like a declaration. We still stand with him, even now. On November 4th, 1979, Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and seized 52 American diplomats. They called the embassy the nest of spies. The hostage crisis lasted 444 days. It paralyzed the Carter administration and cemented the image of Iran in Western minds as a fanatical, irrational enemy. But ask why the students stormed the embassy, why ordinary young Iranians made that decision, and you hear a very different story. You hear about 1953. You hear about SAVAK. You hear about the Shah. You hear about oil. The hostage crisis was not the origin of the conflict. It was a symptom of it. After the revolution, the relationship between Iran and America did not simply become adversarial. It became, in many ways, even more perverse. When Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran in September 1980, the Reagan administration began quietly supporting Iraq. American intelligence helped Iraqi forces target Iranian troop positions. American companies supplied Iraq with materials for chemical weapons that were used against Iranian soldiers. Thousands of Iranians died from mustard gas and nerve agents, while American officials looked the other way. Then, in 1988, the USS Vincennes, a U.S. Navy cruiser operating in the Persian Gulf, shot down Iran Air Flight 655, a commercial passenger aircraft. All 290 civilians on board were killed, including 66 children. The captain of the Vincennes received a medal. The United States paid compensation, but never issued a formal apology. For Iranians, this was not an isolated incident. It was the latest entry in a ledger that stretched back a century. And then the nuclear standoff, the crippling sanctions, the cyber attacks on Iranian centrifuges, the assassinations of Iranian scientists, the killing of General Qasem Soleimani in 2020 by a U.S. drone strike at Baghdad airport. Each of these events, seen in isolation, can be explained, justified, or rationalized. But seen through Iranian eyes, through 100 years of occupation, oil theft, coups, and support for their oppressors. They form a continuous, unbroken narrative. This is why the phrase "death to America" is not simply propaganda. For many Iranians, it is a compressed expression of a century of grievance. It is not madness. It is history. None of this means Iran's government is blameless. The Islamic Republic has been authoritarian, repressive, and destabilizing to its region in ways that are real and well documented. The oppression of Iranian women, the persecution of minorities and dissidents, the funding of militant groups, these are not inventions of Western propaganda. But here is the critical question that history demands we ask. If you remove the 1953 coup, does the 1979 revolution happen? If the Shah had been a democratic leader rather than an American-backed autocrat, do Iranians turn Khomeini? If Mosaddegh had been allowed to lead his country, does Iran become a democracy or a theocracy? We cannot know. History doesn't offer do-overs. What we can know is this. The United States, at a pivotal moment in Iranian history, chose oil interests and Cold War strategy over democracy and self-determination. It chose the Shah over the people, and it spent the next 3 decades arming, funding, and embracing that choice, while Iranian society was slowly crushed beneath it. The hatred that followed was not mysterious. It was not irrational. It was not the product of religion or culture or ancient enmity. It was cause and effect, playing out across a century. There is a line from Mohammad Mosaddegh, spoken during his trial in 1953, that has stayed with Iranians ever since. He told the court, "My greatest sin is that I nationalized Iran's oil industry and removed the hand of the plunderers and the political exploiters from this country." He said it as an accusation. His judges wrote it down as a confession. Mosaddegh died under house arrest, officially a traitor. In Iranian memory, he is a martyr, the symbol of a country that briefly held its own destiny and had it taken away. The story of Iran and America is the story of that stolen moment, of a democracy dismantled, a dictator installed, a revolution born in fury, and 2 nations locked in an enmity so deep, so layered with history and betrayal, that neither side has ever fully reckoned with how it began. To understand why Iran hates America, you don't have to agree with the Islamic Republic. You don't have to justify the hostage crisis or the proxy wars or the nuclear brinkmanship. You just have to be willing to read the full ledger. Because history doesn't begin when we start paying attention. It begins long before. And the echoes of that 1953 summer in Tehran, the tanks, the coup, the old man in pajamas, are still shaping the world you wake up in every single day. If this story surprised you, if it filled in gaps that mainstream coverage of the Middle East never quite addresses, then you're already thinking like a historian. History is rarely about good nations and evil ones. It's about power, choices, and consequences that stretch across generations. And the more of that story you understand, the harder it becomes to accept the simple versions they hand you.